We'll cover that, and we are in the studio, Trustmark Studios, with Ed Penny. Ed is the Director of Public Policy, Southern Region for Ducks Unlimited, and Alex Littlejohn is State Director of the Nature Conservancy, Mississippi. So I saw the new web. This is new.
It's up and running.
And if you haven't seen it, it's pretty darn good. You got some stats, you got some pictures, and explain it to us a little bit.
Yeah, so first off, it's conserve.ms. It's the new website that Ed and the coalition and us have all been working on.
Need to turn it, Mike.
I'm sorry.
There we go.
I'm sorry. First of all, it's the website is conserve.ms. It's a website that shows or represents what we're trying to do with the Outdoor Stewardship Coalition, which is what Ed and I are part of, along with many others. And it really just paints a picture of what conservation funding can do for the state of Mississippi with the stats and what the outdoor recreation, how important it is to this state and so forth. But it's, again, conserve.ms, and we'd like for everybody to look at it and sign up to receive newsletters and information as we run into the next session.
Would you be an official member at that time, or just for the information? It's not like the Parents Campaign that you're going to charge.
Yeah, I mean, you would simply be a supporter at that time. Yeah, that's right. We're not asking for anything.
Ed, for people who, and we always have a new audience, people joining in us, but explain exactly where we were and exactly where we are now as far as the last session and what went on.
Sure. So the coalition formed to start thinking about how to support our outdoor economy and our habitat in Mississippi. And what we did this past legislative session was we worked with several legislators to introduce a bill to set up a dedicated funding program for conservation across the entire state of Mississippi.
Which is something other states do, most other states.
Every other state, and particularly in the Southeast, the only two states that do not have something like this and something that we're working on are Louisiana and Mississippi.
And thank you to Louisiana. They help us out on being last on a couple of things anyway. So
we better hurry up because they're coming on strong.
They are working on it too.
Yep.
We just didn't. You couldn't get it through. It didn't pass.
We had some success. We got a bill out of the House, 117-2. I like to quote that stat. And then we had some discussion in the Senate, and it came up with some different goals for the program, and we just couldn't agree to them, and it kind of fell apart there at the end.
What has happened since that time, as far as meetings or anything that you guys have done?
We have not stopped moving. We have taken a little bit of pause during the summer. You know, it gets so hot, and people don't want to be talking about legislation immediately after the session's over, but we're starting to crank back up, and we've got some things to discuss.
And stop me if I'm wrong on this one. What the format of this was basically this, is that you would take 2% of the 7%. It would not go up to 9%. On a defined list of products that you purchased that had some connection to sports. And I guess it would be anything from boats to life jackets or whatever it happened to be. Much like back to school, anything that's qualified on that one. And you would take 2% of that 7% and you would put it in a trust fund. And you did have some boundaries on that. What was it, Alex? I think it was $20 million.
Yeah, we would take up to $15 million annually, and the fund could not have over $20 million in it.
Every year, it had to be allocated to groups.
It had to be allocated out to projects.
And then if you're a group that wanted to expand or whatever you wanted to do to enhance the out from bike trails to parks to duck hunting to whatever it happened to be, then the group would meet, the board would meet. Explain the board a little bit, Ed.
Yeah, so that was a good question. We would have a board of trustees basically overseeing project selection. We're talking about a competitive grant program here. They would oversee project selection, and they would oversee project management for these projects across the state. And it would be made up of everything from agriculture interest to forestry interest to community interest to conservation.
And they could use some matching funds on that one if they could get it?
Yes. You know, a lot of these groups, nonprofits or state entities, local governments, they have funding available, but they just can't access it because there's no non-federal match.
Who does the checks and balances on this? Who makes sure that the money is spent the right way? Would that be part of your guys or the board's group?
Well, it would be up to the legislation. The legislation would specify all that as much detail as we need to have. We want to make sure that there is clear transparency, that there is a fund and oversight.
Was that in the House bill?
It was in the House bill.
So is it going to be basically the same bill, or with the conversations you've had with members of the House and Senate, is it going to be changed a little bit?
Well, I think that there is a lot of room to improve. We're open to some conversations on how to make it
Where are
how
the
to make it
sticking
better.
points?
Sticking points, I think, relate to private land conservation. 80% of Mississippi is held by private landowners, and there's public benefits whenever we do conservation on private lands. That's extremely clear. And then there's an issue of whether or not nonprofits like Ducks Unlimited should be eligible to submit grant proposals to work with different partners. And there's also the biggest issue of dedicated funding. And the discussion that we had last year was, can we set up a sustainable source of funding through sporting goods sales tax? Or are we going to depend on legislators to appropriate or fund it every single year?
Is this, Alex, the template used by other states, or does it differ a little bit?
It differs state to state, but for the most part, this is very much the core of what you see across the Southeast. And in Georgia, we pretty much took exactly what Georgia put together, and I think they passed it, what was it, Ed, in 2018, 2019? Yep. And we've really watched them closely. In fact, Ed and I were talking this morning about their grant process, and it's that process is very onerous. It's very checks and balance oriented. And but what you're seeing out of Georgia, and again, we're just going there because it's the most recent state that's passed similar legislation, and one that we've adopted here to try to model off of is, that first year out the gate, they allocated $20 million in their trust fund, and they leveraged almost an additional $80. They turned $20 million into $100 million across the state.
Georgia had $20 million on the map here that you've got, and you can see this on the website. And again, the website is MS Conserve.
Conserve.ms.
Conserve.ms.
Yeah, we're going to get that one right.
Conserve.ms.
Yep.
Branded into mine now.
That's right.
So it is on there. $15 million for Alabama. You show $25 million for Kentucky. Arkansas, $45 million. Texas, $200 million.
That's right.
And $100 million allocated in the state of Florida.
And I'll tell you something interesting about Florida. Ed was talking about one of the sticking points was definitely public versus private land conservation. And, in a state that's 80% privately held, Governor DeSantis down there in the past few months allocated $400 million to private land conservation in the state of Florida. And that was basically conservation easement oriented. But, that's a very similar politically oriented state as ours, and private land conservation, they see it as a big benefit.
Well, here's one of the things when you have anybody in the Senate or anywhere else say, well, guys, just come to us and we'll work through appropriation, we'll get this done. Hasn't worked out well, and if you want any testament to that, go take a look at our state parks. There are not dishes in the state parks or in some of the lodging there, so that hasn't worked in the past. And apparently they said the same thing in Texas and places like Florida.
That's right. Well, and the one thing for a program like this to be successful, you've got to be able to look out to a certain degree of certainty 2 to 5 years out and plan ahead. As Ed and I know and are aware at the federal level, some of these programs, we're aware they're coming several years out, and we can put a plan together. But if the allocations to a program are based on, appropriations versus a diversion of actual money, you really don't know what you're planning for.
Is there a need, did anybody bring this up, that they would like to have maybe equal amounts of money, or how this is spent from non-hunting parks and things such as that, bike trails? Is there some allocation on that one, or some preference given to one or the other, or how's that work out?
That's a great question, and I work for Ducks Unlimited, and we love waterfowl hunting there, but this is about way more than hunting and fishing. This is about safe places to be outside. It's about clean water, and it's about turning off your phones and getting outside.
So does that mean yes?
Yes. The answer is a clear yes.
Mississippi economy, $7.45 billion in industry revenue, largest in the state. That's our largest, is the outdoor economy. $7.45 billion. We have 34,700 farms covering 10.4 million acres, and some other pretty neat stats are on there at
Conserve.ms.
Conserve.